Welcome to the Life Coaching with Ryan podcast, episode 15. In today's episode, Selena and I continue our conversation about the mind-body connection and discuss specifically the influence of journaling, both on our own experience and the potential effect it can have for others. So with that, I'd like to transition to journaling, because I think that, again, there's a tendency for people to think that journaling is either a diary or it's some thing where you need this special pre-printed gratitude journal or something like that. And I just don't think it needs to be quite that complicated. It can be, and actually I have some methods that I've been exposed to that I found very valuable. But before we get into that, I'm curious if you have any preferred methods of journaling.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And again, I vary because, as humans, we like some variability over time and we like stability. So I usually get into a practice and work it for a while and then I'll try something else. But I've definitely done, morning pages, which is like the brain dump from Julie Cameron. Shout out. She's still getting shout outs forever on morning pages. And for those of you listening who don't know, it's essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's been a while since I read her book, but it's essentially a brain dump. And I think she has like a page, like you write till you fill up 3 pages. And
three handwritten binder, college ruled.
Which is a lot. And then you start like going, okay, how big could I write? but it's a brain dump. And when I've used it consistently, and I'm not saying I'm doing 3 pages right now, I would be dishonest. But when I'm using that, and I often will do a shorter version of that, it's just getting the junk out. We have such frenetic brain energies. And, most of us are all over the place and we're caught in story and we're caught in emotion. So I love it as a brain dump to just clear the junk before I start my day. Like, let's just get this out. Nobody's ever going to see it. I'm probably never going to read it again. Most of the time I don't. And when I do, I regret. I'm like, what is this? It's not for that. It's for just, and I love this expression of like, just writing on the page at the same pace that it's coming into your brain. So just like going from here down through into your hand and out the pen, and then you can kind of release it. So I love that technique. I also love gratitude writing, and that's one of the ones I use most consistently. And it can be shorter. And so just maybe dropping 5 things I'm grateful for. And that can be really repetitive if you go day to day. So then I try to break it out like 5 things on a personal level, 5 things in my relationship. So you can kind of categorize it to make it more interesting for yourself and to get out of the saying like the same 5 things every day.
Yeah.
5 things I'm sure we could come up with some new ones, like 5 things I'm grateful for in what, like a different category in my creative life, and
5 different ways I feel I succeeded today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or 3.
Yeah. Start with what seems doable, but the gratitude practices are super helpful also. And that's also where I tend to go a lot in my meditation, my personal meditation practices, is to a place of gratitude. Because what happens to our brains, Ryan, when we are in gratitude? Like, what has to be shut off? Like,
as you said it earlier about judgment being such a significant concern. When we're clouded with judgment, then we have all those shoulds, and then we have all these limitations. And gratitude opens us up to possibilities. Really, is my perspective.
Yeah, and it's if we're really immersing in a gratitude, like it just really. And I talked about using all of our senses, and we can do that in a journaling perspective, like my gratitude in my sense of taste. Oh, like I had this amazing meal last night, or had this fresh fig. Or we can go into senses and just open it up even more to like really feeling it. So it's not just writing it, and this is where we use a gratitude and a mindfulness practice. And we can do that with the writing. It's like, how do I experience this? And then just embodying and expanding that sense of gratitude. So we allow it to kind of recircuit our brains a little. So we're building those neural pathways by just wallowing in that. And Rick Hansen has a great TED talk on that, just wallowing in gratitude and building those synapses of gratitude to move our minds towards more positivity and more of a well-being space. So I love.
Go ahead, please.
No, go ahead. I'm done.
I was just going to say, to your point about kind of repetitive feeling, or like doing the same thing all the time. It's like eating the same food every day. In those cases, I do think something that is guided is really valuable.
Yeah.
Whether it's buying someone's journal, or I mentioned Pat Pattison earlier, he has 2 books on songwriting, and he has these series of writing exercises, creative writing exercises
Nice.
that again deal with the 7 senses. And so and he has a prompt and a limit. So it's like dentist is your keyword, and you have 30 seconds to write, and that's it. And
Uh-huh.
in 30 seconds, you have to stop. And then you can do, there's one that's 10 minutes, and let's say it's whatever, ocean. And you have 10 minutes to write about ocean. It's just free form thinking, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But if I didn't have those set up for me with the time limit and the word, and I had to come up with it for myself, there's a barrier to entry.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
so with something like a gratitude journal, it's the same way. I've never used a gratitude practice as far as
Mhm.
journals. There are times I need to remind myself what I'm thankful for, but that tends to be my on the fly as opposed to my journaling.
Yeah,
Um, that's part of kind of like a meditation practice for me, is to stop and breathe and consider what I enjoy and the positive of the
nice.
circumstance. Um, so yeah, gratitude. If I were to do a gratitude journal, I would absolutely need something structured, because
Yeah,
I think I would. I mean, I already know I would burn out, because I burn out on things within a few months, just as part of my personality,
yeah.
or part of my programming, if not my personality. Perhaps something I could change, but I'm not aware of how to at this time. Um, so I, like you, change my practices fairly consistently.
Mhm.
Uh, and sometimes having structure is helpful. Sometimes I don't need it at all. And it's just nice,
Absolutely.
like a morning pages. The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, I'll definitely throw in a
Mhm.
link, is incredibly valuable. So, yeah.
It is. And I love, Ryan, that you keep talking about these creative practices, and I love that you're bringing that piece to the conversation, because I think so many times when we're in a more perpetual cycle of chronic stress or in that sympathetic nervous system, we lose touch with that creativity, which is such a joyous piece of being human.
Yeah.
So I love that you keep bringing that in. I just want to acknowledge that.
Well, thank you. It's
Yeah.
actually something that is something I'd like to explicitly give some type of a workshop on,
Yeah.
is that you can be creative without being an artist.
Yeah.
There's again this limiting belief that somehow if I'm not great at sketching, or I'm not great at painting, or I'm not great at dancing, or I'm not great at singing, then I'm not an artist. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
like I get that, but one of my teachers said to me that one of how did he phrase it? I'm going to butcher it, but it's essentially that for him a goal is how can he live each day as creatively as possible,
Mm.
and that might be as simple as, man, I hate putting away my tools. How can I do that differently? I'm gonna turn on some music and I'm gonna dance, like not even really dance, but like kind of like, dance while I put away my tools. And suddenly he was putting away
Yeah.
his tools every time he took them out, as opposed
Yeah.
to, like, he transformed this experience for himself. And for me, it's how to take safe risk.
Mm.
Um, that I think part of what holds us all back is that sense of risk. We right now use fear to inform us of what we shouldn't do, as opposed to fear informing us what would be valuable to cautiously do.
Mm.
And that as we learn to evaluate what is the source of the fear, then we can start to say, this put this risk on a scale of 1 to 10, and that if it's a 3 or lower, that's a safe risk. And so
Mm.
I want to find out how I can be creative and play and do something I've never done, and take it as an opportunity, so that now I know that part of me is not going to enjoy taking that risk, because it is a risk, and we are programmed not to take risks unless we are those very unique brains that are programmed to take risks.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so how do I take this risk and enjoy it as much as I can, accepting that I may not enjoy it as fully as something that I'm comfortable with? And so there's this, I think that things like writing, or just general experimentation, like be a scientist in your life and experiment and just do it
Yeah.
with a sense of whimsy. That's kind of my thing.
Yeah, and curiosity. I think curiosity is a highly underrated skill
Yes.
set, and it's so needed. And when I teach, I emphasize, like, let's just be curious about what's going on in the landscape of our world and our mind,
Mhm.
and so let's replace judgment with curiosity. So instead of like,
Yes.
oh, I really messed that up, or I'm really not good at meditating, my brain is all over the place, like, let me get really curious and ask different questions about that. Well, what is this showing me? Oh, it's showing me my brain's really busy. Well, what a great thing that I'm really working on these skills. So it's like asking different questions and framing things differently can really change the course of our life. It's
Yes.
it's pretty amazing.
I mean, if I had to give people one thing to transform their lives, it would be exactly that. It would be curiosity. Just be by getting curious, you
Yeah.
remove so much of the noise
Yeah.
because it come now you have a question. You have a single question. Oh, I'm curious why blank, or I'm curious how blank, or how could I
Yeah.
do
What
this?
would happen?
What would it,
Yeah.
exactly?
What would happen if I try this? And then if it doesn't work, like instead of going into like, I'm a failure, I'm never going to do this again, like, what happens if I tweak this or try something a little different? How does that feel? Instead of just this automatic shutdown with the judgment. And the judgment is, I mean, I want to honor our fear because fear
Yes.
is a necessary thing. And I think so much of this conversation can imply that we're trying to get rid of this part of our brain. And
No.
it's absolutely necessary. And it serves a really valuable purpose. We just don't want to let it override every single thing we're doing.
Right. If it's the default, then that's not ultimately going to serve us.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, which is why actually another journaling practice that I've used very successfully is to write out my judgments.
yeah.
There's something that I was taught about called the Mitote journal, and if I understand the translation of Mitote correctly, it's like a marketplace.
Hmm.
And so it implies the sense of noise that's in our head, where it's all this crosstalk and all these conversations. And so a Matote journal, for me, it implies three things. But the way it was originally taught to me is just to divide a piece of paper into two and have judge on one side and victim on the other.
Yeah.
And that simply by doing that, now we can start to sort out our thoughts where we are getting stuck into judgment, or stuck into victimhood, and just sorting that out and accepting it, owning it, and writing it. Then you can start to see your patterns. You can start to see what you might want to change about your thinking, and really just often coming to awareness of something starts to change it inherently. You don't even have to consciously consider how I would change it. Just becoming aware of it, it's like,
Hmm.
oh,
Yeah. Yeah, I've always heard that called name it to tame it, and it's so true.
yeah, yeah.
Just start illuminating what's going on. It's like the same with the mindfulness and the meditation practice. It's like, and that sounds like a version of a mindfulness practice. It's like as soon as our patterns are illuminated, then we have so much more capacity to work with them. It's really cool.
Yeah, you can break it out into anything you want. You can say, anytime I get triggered today, I'm going to write what triggered me, or it can be what just starting as you get more advanced with that and more comfortable with that. It could just be what thoughts repeat the most often in my head, and
Yeah.
just when a first time a thought pops into your head, write it down, and then every time it happens after that, add a hash mark after it, and just capture those thoughts and like what's on loop the most in my day. And it
Yeah.
could be something devastating like I'm not a worthy human being, or it could be something very empowering like I'll figure this out, I always do. Like you'll
Mhm.
just catch your types of thinking, and then you can choose again to change it or not change it, or maybe just awareness itself will change it.
Sure. And you also named a really amazing strategy in there, Ryan, which is just I just want to point out, which is reframing. So
Yes.
taking a really challenging belief we
Yeah.
hold about ourselves, and then just even if you don't believe it yet, just writing it out differently. So instead of say, judging self like I'm terrible at, but we'll use the example of meditation because this is one of the things that people come so often with. I can't meditate, my mind is all over, right? So
Right.
it's one of these common myths. So coming in with that and then reframing that into something more supportive. And even if we're not there, we don't believe it yet, it can really help us kind of grow into that space and shift some of those limiting beliefs.
Yeah, and again, in fact, as I brought up in the book club episodes when I talked about the Willpower Instinct by Kelly McGonigal,
Yeah.
she said bad meditation is the best meditation,
Yes,
because
it is.
people think that there is, like, again, an ideal, like somehow I should have a quiet mind, and if I don't have a quiet mind, then meditating is useless, when in fact, if you are a quote bad meditator, you actually have more opportunities to bring yourself back to your breath. And in fact,
Absolutely.
that practice of bringing yourself back to your breath is what's building that muscle of awareness. So someone who has a busy mind and uses meditation and has to keep bringing themselves back to their breath is actually increasing their willpower far more than someone who
Yeah.
has a very quiet mind. So that activity of meditation is not bringing them that particular benefit.
Yeah,
It's bringing them other
absolutely.
benefits, but it's not bringing them that particular benefit of being able to
Mhm,
come back to your awareness
mhm.
consistently. So that practice isn't, yeah, it's just not as helpful for that
Yeah.
specific goal.
Absolutely. And we start where we are. And it's so amazing to be at the beginning of this path because there's so much improvement we can make and so much shifting we can make in our minds. And when we get further in the practice, it's much more subtle, right? It's you hit
Yeah.
some plateaus and it's much more subtle. So it's a very different place. But it's beautiful to be at the beginning. What did you say that was that quote? A bad meditation is the best meditation? Like
Yeah.
from Kelly McDonald. I love that. That's
Yeah.
great.
I'm paraphrasing it. She phrased it
Yeah.
slightly differently, but that's my paraphrase. That bad
No,
meditation is the best meditation.
it's
Um,
fantastic. Yeah.
I also wanted to, because we touched on awareness and releasing patterns as benefits of journaling, but I wanted to also say that I have attempted this one type of journaling where you ask a question right before
Hmm.
you go to sleep and you write it down in your journal. And then when you wake up, you just start writing to that question. And and again, some people would think, oh, that's very woo woo, but it's also very practical because our brain has so much information that we don't easily access, whether it's a subconscious process or unconscious process, wherever that information is.
Yeah.
And we understand it to be as real as we understand these mental processes to be, since we can't necessarily point at them directly in the brain, but they're they we have this universal experience of things that are operating outside of our awareness. So journaling can bring to our conscious awareness these other things that are happening. I like to joke about the machine that I can sometimes, instead of consciously trying to figure something out, I will ask myself a clear question and then choose to forget it, i.e., not think about it regularly and just go about my day. And then the next time it pops into my head, I have an answer.
Yes.
So we have this
Yes.
amazing layers going on. Like, why not use it to its fullest potential? And I find journaling is one way to do that.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up this what I call like below the line stuff. And it's stuff that's happening in our systems that's um and this might even be a segue to talking about movement, but
Mm,
stuff that's been embodied in our systems
yes, please.
and it's like it sometimes it comes out in these creative processes or journaling and it's like we tend to think like why would I want to look at that stuff especially if it's challenging or negative and so we just tamp it down and many of us do this and sometimes it's an appropriate strategy especially if we're in a survival situation that's very challenging it's better to dissociate to survive in that moment but
Yeah.
then later it's like okay and we want to do this especially if you've had a trauma and with a skillful help but
Yes.
later
Therapy is amazing. Let's not forget.
yeah, and those, people who are doing amazing things in the therapy world right now, as they're connecting the body and mind together more, they're getting so much more traction and helping people, and I love that.
Mm.
But we have all these things that are happening below the line. They're not in our conscious awareness. And let me tell you, they are driving so much of our behavior. It's not even
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah. It's true.
Like just the other day, I will go back to Dan Siegel's hand model about how the brain works. Like I flipped my lid. I had to physically remove myself from a person in my life who I care about, which doesn't happen to me a lot. And
Yeah.
and what was happening though is I was tapping into this below the line stuff and so our memories don't have a timestamp so
Right.
something in my current environment layered with all the political stuff and da 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 has everything at the surface and so just something that happened just triggered into old below the line stuff that clearly hasn't been totally integrated and processed and just brought it up and it was driving my behavior and actions so journaling and meditating and even movement can help us integrate those below the line things that are actually really driving our behaviors. And we don't always know why. Like, why am I doing this? I don't
Yes.
understand. I'm an
Exactly.
intelligent person. Why am I acting this way? And so
Right.
that a lot of
Right.
that is like,
Right.
what's going on? So we can tap into those things through these processes.
Yeah, that's something I enjoy about Brooke Castillo's model, that she got from CBT, the cognitive behavioral therapy, is understanding, we have a circumstance and our thoughts about the circumstance, how we interpret it, et cetera, leads to feelings. Those
Uh-huh.
feelings lead to some automatic actions potentially that lead to a set of results that we may or may not want. And so being able to back up that train and get to our level of interpretation, sometimes that you can do that consciously and sometimes you can, and you need some time to unpack it, whether it's journaling
Yeah.
or whatever else. So I think that that's very important. And just for anyone who's curious, we're recording this in early October 2018. So if there's
Yeah.
anyone who really wants to know like what was going on, they can feel free to look that up. But, for
Yeah.
context. But and here's a little preview of what's coming up next week. You had mentioned this may be a great way to segue, a great time to segue
Yeah.
into movement, and I very much agree because again, now we're talking about the embodied experience.
Yeah.
of this. And there are ways to get information from our bodies that reveal some of these processes we may not be conscious of.
Yeah.
But beyond that, also, just as I mentioned earlier, our body affects our mind. And so
Mhm.
I'm curious to start kind of, do you have, again, some preferred movement practices? And even maybe even before that, maybe describe a little about your history with movement,
Yeah.
and then maybe segue into
Mm.
preferred movement styles. Like the show? Consider subscribing through my Patreon at patreon.com/lifecoachingwithryan. You'll get early access to shows and potentially a host of other rewards. Want more? You can also find me streaming on Twitch at twitch.tv/lifecoachingwithryan, where I play some games and I continue the conversation. I'm pretty active on Instagram. You can find me at instagram.com/educate4, the number 4, underscore life. That's where I do my book club. I record the book club episodes live on Mondays, and then I post them to IGTV. Later, I post them on YouTube. See you next time.